Welcome to the Why Music podcast, where we talk to independent artists about their journeys, the inspirations behind their music, and ultimately why they make music. This next artist is an indie rock powerhouse that has been on the receiving end of quite a few awards and nominations. Delivering both epic anthems and acoustic ballads, there's something for everyone. This Vermont native is far from finished when it comes to writing music for the world to hear. Welcome, Will, aka Ships Have Sailed.
Thanks for having me, Ava. Really appreciate the opportunity and looking forward to chatting.
So I always like to get started with kind of asking just where your journey with music all started.
Yeah, my journey with music started at a really young age. My mom was mostly into like folk and classical, and she had a pretty extensive record collection. So, we were always listening to music around the house. She has a story about me just kind of like off by myself playing with blocks, and there was like a Vivaldi concerto on, and she walked back into the room, and apparently I was humming along with it flawlessly, as the story goes. I was like 2 years old. Um, so that's where it really all began. And then as I was kind of growing up, I was in violin lessons for a while. I took piano lessons, all classical at that point. And that all started really young. And when I kind of got to be, like 7, 8, 9, I started to discover, like, through friends, kind of more popular forms of music, the Beatles, and then getting a little bit heavier as I got older. Like I discovered Nirvana and like the whole grunge scene, and Hendrix and Led Zeppelin. Like my kind of circle of the classics started growing as well. And I never really loved reading music, so the classical lessons were kind of a push and pull. Like I love the music itself, but I tend to learn better by ear, and my instructors really didn't love that. So it was kind of a natural progression for me to gradually move towards like guitar and bass and that kind of stuff. And I do kind of regret not continuing to practice the piano because my chops are horrible these days, and I have to do a lot of like editing and studio magic behind the scenes when I'm doing key parts. But here I am.
So, where kind of in that transition from like doing the classical with the violin and all that into like more guitar stuff, did you kind of start writing your own music?
Yeah, that's a good question. Pretty early on, although the songs were terrible, I will just go out and say that they were really not good. Probably, I think I started my first band, which was like this crusty, punky, like something in there. And I think I was like 11 years old, like 10 and a half or 11 years old, and I was playing bass. And we did some kind of grunge like covers, but we did have a couple of originals too. And yeah, we like played around a little bit, like at events and at like, parents' parties and stuff like that, and school stuff. Um, and that's kind of where it started. I kind of went from there. And of course, like my songwriting and my like style of music and the genres that I incorporate have of course like changed and refined over time. But yeah, it's been a cool journey. We all have to start somewhere, right?
Oh no, absolutely. Everybody's got a beginning, whether it's similar to what they're doing now or very different. Um, at what I mean, like you said, you were fronting this band, you had this sort of band thing going on that kind of started off in the songwriting space. Did you kind of always see the stuff that you were doing in a band sort of format, or was it ever like something you thought of as, oh, at some point I can go off and do this completely like independently?
I have always gravitated towards the band format. And, even now, Ships Have Sailed started as a collection of songs that just weren't a fit for the band that I was in at the time. And I kind of couldn't let them go, and I started developing them myself. But once that started picking up traction, the first thing that I did was figure out what the band would be. And we've gone through some lineup changes, and life also kind of like influences that, especially as people start like starting families and having kids, and more responsibilities means less time for music often. And so at the moment, it's myself and my good friend Art, who's a drummer, and we perform as a duo. Although, I have to say we haven't been doing a lot of live performances lately. We did a virtual show last year, and we brought in a couple other friends who are very talented musicians to help us fill out the lineup. So it was a four piece in that particular case. And yeah, I just like making music with other people when it's live. And I would say that like I am the heart and soul of Ships Have Sailed, and most of the music comes from me, but like I I like to think that it's a bigger thing than just myself.
Absolutely. I mean, like you said, it has gone past just the duo stage, but even at like its core, it still is that duo set. Where did the name Ships Have Sailed kind of stem from?
Yeah, also a very good question. So I mentioned that I was in this other band as the songs were kind of forming for the first Ships Have Sailed EP. And, um, it's a band that I had essentially joined and helped to create as like right when I moved to Los Angeles. And like actually in the first couple weeks, it's a little bit weird. And it was a pretty lengthy journey with those guys. It started as kind of a straight ahead alternative band, and then we met this MC who liked our sound and wanted to see what it would feel like to collaborate. And we did that. It felt really good, and we actually pivoted the whole project to be more of kind of like a rock hip hop fusion. Um, and we started getting bigger shows across town. Like lots of people started showing up. We started selling out shows, and we got signed. And as can often happen when that's the case, and when you have like a lot of people in the band, as things were being registered, certain things weren't being done right. Basically, there was like some logistical hurdles that were causing problems on the creative side, and also that unfortunately translated to people, like some people getting paid and other people not getting paid. And like it was all very like nobody was very transparent about the logistics and how things were set up to work. And so that project kind of felt like it was falling apart. And at the same time, I had these what I felt were some of my best songs. And I'm fortunate to kind of continue to feel that way as I create with ships in mind, that my work continues to be its best. And so I kind of like dove into those, and I was just like, well, I'll focus on this for now and try to work out the logistical stuff with the other band. And um, it got to a point where it was pretty clear that the folks who were kind of like holding the reins were not going to be open to like changing the way they were doing things moving forward. And so I was having a pity party late night, and also in the stages of trying to figure out the name for this new project. And I was probably like a couple whiskeys too deep, and it was like 2 in the morning, and I was kind of like wallowing in self-pity over like this whole situation. Like it was a lot of time and energy and blood, sweat, and tears that went into that. And also like these guys were my friends, like it probably my best friends at the time. And it's a really hard thing to wrap your head around when people aren't doing things right, especially when they're supposed to be looking out for you as like a friend and a member of this musical family. Um, so whenever I feel myself sliding into that place, I'll let myself sit there for a minute and then I'll be like, okay, this is not productive. So you have to get yourself out of it and move on. And um, the way my mind kind of did that in this particular case was just like, well, maybe it's not a missed opportunity. Maybe it's not like, maybe this missed opportunity is like leading you to somewhere better. Maybe this is meant to happen. Maybe this is a speed bump on the road that like you're supposed to go on. And I started pondering about like all of the other little things that may have felt really uncomfortable over the course of my life, but had ultimately steered me into what I think is a good journey. And the phrase that that ship has sailed popped into my head. Um, and I was like, that's really negative. It really should be more agnostic because life is all about those little unexpected twists and turns, and it should be ships have sailed. And I was like, as soon as I kind of said that to myself, I was like, whoa, that's a really good band name. And I was like, I bet it's been taken. Like, I bet it's been used. And I went at like 3 in the morning and I uh, did a whole bunch of Googling and a whole bunch of searching and realized nobody had used it. And I registered all the domain names right then and all the social handles. And I was just like, that's it. It's was the perfect kind of um, flavor for this project because you know, I know I'm kind of rambling, but I will just add that like my personal philosophy and the philosophy that embeds itself into my music and the music of ships is like one of cautious optimism, you know, like I do believe that everything happens for a reason. And I believe that there's an energy in the universe that is there to guide us, whether or not I, assume what that energy might be. Um, and I do think that if we listen to our intuitions, like even when things get uncomfortable, sometimes they are still pushing you in the right direction. And I think that every challenge kind of um, is there to prepare us for something that that's coming in the future. That overcoming that challenge will make easier for us at the time. So um, it really was kind of just like this serendipitous train of thought that led me to the name and has helped to shape the philosophy and the like the songwriting and the whole vibe of the project.
I mean, I think you have a really good point with the whole ships have sailed thing. I'm also one to think everything does happen for a reason, whether we will acknowledge it now or acknowledge it 5 years from now. It happened for a reason. But I think that's really cool that it's kind of taken on a form larger than just being the title of the project. Like it's kind of essentially the whole like backbone of the whole thing. Like it's not just a name, there's a whole kind of like you said story behind it and everything. Um with that being said, what do you think kind of beyond that inspires a lot of your songwriting?
Well, I've had an interesting journey in my life, and it would be a better book or movie or TV series than it would be to try to condense it into a podcast interview or any sort of interview, as it were. But suffice to say, there have been like significant challenges and bumps and bruises along the way, and so a lot of our inspiration, I should say, a lot of my inspiration comes from personal experience and, overcoming obstacles and the idea of human resilience. And as I continue to write, I feel like more and more, like, it's almost like I'm able to kind of take things and process them. And as the result of that, like, music just happens. Um, and then also, like, sometimes, of course, I'll like draw inspiration from things that I see in the world or stories that other people tell me, or it's not all internal, but it does. a lot of it does stem from my own personal journey.
I think that, I mean, I get that answer a lot, but it's also, I think, probably the best way to kind of approach that kind of thing because songwriting is essentially like storytelling and in the human experience, we're going through a lot of the same things. It's just different characters, different things happen at different points in the plot, like that kind of thing.
Yep.
But I think that like if you're telling your own story, odds are there's somebody else that's living that same story just with a little bit of a twist.
With a little bit of a twist, different time, different place, different person, and different lens. And I do think it's pretty fascinating that, like, you know, we can have very similar, if not same experiences, but also experience them and feel them and process them very differently, actually. Um, and so, yeah, that's something I've been noticing a lot lately, and especially like, um, you know, talking with my siblings about like common things that happened to us as children and trying to absorb how they remember them just slightly differently than I do. It really is a fascinating thing because perception has so much to do with like our memories and our thought patterns, and it's really cool. It's a giant rabbit hole that we could spend hours talking about probably.
No, absolutely. Um, if you had to kind of create a new genre out of the style of music that you make, like kind of come up with a new name that is like a category that have sailed purely sits in by itself, what would you call it?
Well, this is easy because you're supposed to have an elevator pitch ready when people ask you for like a nutshell of what you do. What I say in those situations is that we make pop-domistic indie rock.
Ooh.
Yeah.
I think, I mean, that kind of throws in a little bit of a flavor of the whole backstory to the name with also classifying it as like the genre that it like actually is a part of.
Yeah. Yeah, and I will be honest, I agonized over that little tag. But I feel like it's fun to make new words. So poptimism, there you go, new word. And like I feel like as we've progressed, I have definitely like leaned back a little bit more into my rock roots. So I do like having that kind of named in there as part of the
Mhm.
blend.
No, and I think that kind of wraps it up really well. That's one of the most direct answers that I usually that question catches people off guard, but you had that armed and loaded.
It's an industry thing. It took me years to kind of want to. A lot of folks like really really shy away from strictly labeling what they do, and
Mhm.
you know with anything that you're trying to kind of like market as a brand, you really have to be clear about what you're offering, and that means you have to label it well. And so as much as I don't love putting myself in a box either, and really we release music when a song feels right for any particular moment. Yeah, our single "Rise" was like sitting around for probably 2.5 years, all finished and hadn't been released. And um, when the pandemic escalated, we were out on tour, and the entire tour like fell apart like very quickly in a matter of days, like right before our eyes. And we found ourselves in a situation where we had to make the most of a really, really disappointing um situation, and also kind of like it was a weird time where again, like as humans, we were all having this shared experience that like it hit no one. I feel like there was no one experiencing that who didn't feel like they got hit by a Mack truck, you know? Um, and so we essentially decided that our tour, which like all our reservations were non-refundable and whatever, our tour was going to be a content gathering journey, and we were going to basically like shoot as much footage as we could, like tell the story of what was happening to us, but we were also out on the road with another indie duo, uh this band called Quitting Whitney. Um and so we shot them a music video and they shot us a music video while we were out there, turned into the video for our song Love in October. And then as we were kind of like on the home stretch getting back to LA, like I was kind of, I was really proud of that pivot actually for all of us, like for being able to actually just be like, okay, well, the best thing that we can do is like get over the fact that our shows aren't going to happen and make the most of this journey. And I was kind of thinking about that, and I don't know why, but like Rise just popped back into my head, and I was just like, huh, like Art and I were taking the driving shifts, and I was driving and he was in the front seat. And I just looked over to him. I was just like, "Hey, you remember this song? Um I know we haven't found a home for it, but what do you think? Like maybe this is the moment." And he was just like, "All right, let's listen to it." So we put it on. And the guys from Quitting Whitney were like, "What is this?" And we're like, "This is a song that we did a while back and we haven't really found a home for it." And they're like, "Dude, you got to release this." So that was our pivot, you know? And um circling back to the whole genre thing and not wanting to put myself in a box, like
Mhm.
that song it was a really really big curveball sonically. Like it's very very different from a lot of the stuff that our fan base and we ourselves are used to releasing. Um, and it has done incredibly well. So I guess what I'll say is that like as much as that tag is really nice and neat, I like from a creative perspective, I never leave a door closed. Like I think we could release a completely acoustic song and be fine, and we could release like kind of a heavy rock song and be fine, and we could release something that's like cinematic and very, very synth driven pop, and we appear to be fine. So I'm super grateful that people like give us the leeway to really just do what feels right in the moment and create like completely freely.
No, absolutely. I mean, you see a lot of like bigger artists anymore that do a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And once you've kind of built that foundation on like, okay, like this is what these guys are all about, like you can venture in those different ways because people will care more about it being from you than strictly what it sounds like. Um, with that being said, is there a release that you've put out that you think kind of best embodies Ships Have Sailed? Like if you had to sell somebody on the band and like convince them to be your next fan, what song would you play for them?
Well, I would encourage them to sit down with, a cup of tea or a glass of wine or whatever and put our album Ages on their record player and just let it play. I think by the time they were finished with side A, they would really want to flip it over and hear side B. And I do think that that album, like I'm an album purist. I think an album should play start to finish and make sense, but take you on a journey. It doesn't have to be a concept album, although I love concept albums. Um, and it should give you like it should never give you the inclination to skip a song. Um, you should want to listen to every single thing on there. And I think we really accomplished that with our album Ages. Our first LP, Mood Swings, also a very good listen. But gun to my head, I have to say that Ages is the best thing that we've created. And it was a real personal journey over the course of creating that album. And the stories in there are like, they are real life stories. And it's a real life journey of kind of like the realization that, as stupid as this sounds, because we all should realize it, like we're all mortal and we're here for a very short period of time. And like there are certain things that we can experience in our lifetime that really do just remind you of that. And so Ages is kind of like it starts in the kind of like ego driven um like um I guess I'll say cocky, like youthful aspect, and then it kind of matures as you go through. I wanted to really paint that picture because it definitely was something that I was experiencing myself over the course of creating it. And yeah, so I would it's a bigger time investment than just one song for sure, but I think it's a worthy one. So anybody who is listening and is now curious, please go check out our album Ages. I think you'll really like it. And then hit us up on socials. I sit behind them, and I always love to hear feedback. So I would love to hear what you think.
Is there a particular, I know like I'm a big album person as well, and I like the idea of albums. I know everything's kind of shifted more in the single direction anymore because attention span has gone down and down and down over years, and you can't sell and you can't sell anybody on an album as easy as you can sell them on one song because it's less of a time commitment.
That's
Um,
true.
with that being said, is there a particular song off of Ages that you would, if you can't convince them to listen to the whole thing, is there a particular one that you think would be the one to listen to, or would you kind of pivot away from the album if you weren't listening to it in its entirety and pivot towards maybe a single or something off an EP from previous projects?
I think that there are a lot of singles on the album, and it just kind of depends on what type of genre you like and what type of mood you're in. So if you're into like bluesy aggressive rock, you should check out our song More. If you want like the funky pop, like upbeat stuff, check out Take My Money or Faithless. If you want more like moody or exuberant, like indie style rock, you could do Love in October for the moody flavor, Alive for the exuberant flavor. And if you are just feeling moody and contemplative, um, let's see, Escape is a good one. Ages, the title track, is a really good one. And then also, if you're contemplating burning something down that you spent a long time building and you're just like contemplating burning it down and walking away, listen to the first song, Can't Go Back.
A lot of good options.
I mean, I think so. But then again, I probably I'm probably biased.
Maybe a little bit.
Maybe a little.
If you had to pick two or three artists or bands even that you think your music kind of sounds like a combination of, who would it be?
Wow. I definitely have to say Andrew McMahon is in there. Not only from his In the Wilderness project, but also like there's a little bit of the Something Corporate stuff and Jack's Mannequin vibe in there too. Um, been listening to a lot of The National. Really love their album Trouble Will Find Me. Let's see. Bleachers is a great Bleachers is a great reference. And man, I don't know. It sounds really cliche, but there's some Coldplay influence in there, but more like early Coldplay, early to mid. And I don't know, who am I leaving out? Churches and the Killers.
A lot of good variety in there.
Yeah, I think so. And really like I don't know. I've got influences all over the place, like from classical to metal to classic rock and like literally everything in between. So, um, yeah, it's kind of like it all weaves its way into our music here and there.
Do you think that with some of those examples, there are any that lean more like production and like sonic heavy versus more our writing styles are the same, or like are there kind of like bits and pieces like specifically you're kind of taking from these different options, or is it just kind of a collective little bit of this, a little bit of that from each and every one of them?
Yeah, I think it's like because you don't want to be like anyone, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like if you're really, really referencing heavily like strictly production from someone, then you probably should go listen to something else for a while and stop referencing it that heavily. I would say it's more like bits and pieces from all over the place. I really love the writing of all of those artists that I mentioned. I really think that they're all quite innovative with their production choices as well. But less so than kind of like emulating the production itself. It's just like I want to do things that are like as cool, as unexpected, but feel as, like
Mhm.
um kind of embodying the spirit behind it as opposed to how it presents, if that makes any sort of sense.
No, it totally makes sense. It's kind of taking these different influences, but filtering it through your lens, essentially, where
Yeah,
it's
that's a
not
really great way of putting it, actually. Yep.
like you're just the new Coldplay or the new Killers or the new Bleachers or anything like that. It's like it's a piece of this, a piece of that, a piece of that, and a piece of this, and it's all kind of put into this equation that's then funneled through the ships have sailed lens, which is exactly how it should be. It should never be like I am the next like Taylor Swift. I've got the next like Harry Styles thing going on. It should never be a copycat kind of thing, essentially. Like that can be a big influence, but it has to still at the end of the day like have like your stamp on it, have your mark on it, because if you're just doing what they're doing, no one's going to care cuz they already exist.
Exactly. And they're already much, I mean, all those artists are more well known than we are at this time. So
Mhm.
they've got the jump on us, so we've got to do something different.
Yeah.
It's why I like recommended if you like as opposed to sounds like as a tag, like
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, no, like there's always some sort of correlation, but it's always got to be you want to be the sum of the equation. You don't want to just be on the other side of the equal sign from one other artist.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
I think you kind of touched on this with your answer to my question about what song you would show someone. What is the ideal listening scenario for someone to consume your music in?
Vinyl, like a really, really well, or I mean, in in the studio sounds really good too. But yeah, vinyl with a really nice record player, with well balanced speakers, I would say, is the ideal scenario. But with that being said, like everyone's listening on their iDevices lately, so I would at least say please make sure that you have like a really nice set of earbuds or headphones because yeah, the audio waveform will appreciate it, as will your ears.
Um, what about like just the overall atmosphere, the setting, that kind of thing?
Well, I think that's kind of a personal choice. I personally love listening to music with my eyes closed just because um it lets you focus on, what your ears are hearing. With that being said, like I myself can't always do that either. So, yeah, it just depends what works for you and like what you enjoy.
Absolutely. Um, what is it that you think sets Ships Have Sailed apart from other artists and bands?
That's a really hard one because I think that for the most part, like if you're trying to pursue a career in music as an artist or as a songwriter, like then your voice has a message that's worth listening to as well. So, as much as I think that mine also has like my creations and my voice have messages that are worth consuming and that you know, can and have helped people through hard situations or help them celebrate their wins or those are like my favorite moments is like getting those stories through our socials or whatever have you or like through conversations. But I don't think that necessarily sets me apart. Like I don't. I feel like that's what music is there for, generally speaking. Um, I would say like I am an incredibly and increasingly honest songwriter, and I try every single time that I'm creating to raise the bar in the studio as far as quality too. Um, I would say that to a degree that probably sets me apart, just the fact that like I can I can build my own vision. Like there isn't a label here, there isn't an A&R. I am actually talking to a manager right now, so that could happen in the future, but like I'm selective about my team, and I I have a pretty clear vision of the music, and I want to make sure that any team members I bring on board are like aligned with that vision and are excited about helping me to realize it as opposed to kind of trying to change things. So I guess if I guess all of that stuff is slightly unique, but in saying how unique I am, I just like I feel like in a way you're kind of like saying somebody else is maybe not doing it right or like whatever, and I don't want to be that guy. So I would just say that like there is a lot of music out there. I do think ours is particularly amazing, but then again, I'm biased, and these songs are my babies, and they come from inside of me, and they're really special to me. So, I would say that. I think the the takeaway is like spend a little bit of time with a couple of our songs and see what you think.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think there's always that sort of wrestling when it comes to saying what you think makes you special in a way. And it's always like you don't want to be the person that's like, oh, like I'm so special, because it's like you think you're like hot shit. You think that necessarily in a way that that can imply you think you're like better than other people. But I think at the same time, what makes you different can also be one of your biggest strengths. And it's not necessarily speaking to what other people are doing right or wrong. It's just speaking to there's something about what you're doing that's different than some things that other people are doing. And that's fine because, like somebody who's going to listen to my music might not be the same person who would listen to anything of yours or would listen to something of somebody else's. And so it's like that, like different quality just kind of draws in the right people, I think. And I get it. I mean, I don't want to be that guy either who's like, oh, like I think this is what makes me like special, because that can paint the wrong picture. But at the same time, it's like that can also be your absolute greatest asset.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. It's a good point. So, like, in a few words, I would say honesty, empathy, emotion, and depth. How's that?
I think that's a great little summary. I
Cool.
mean, it's very direct and simple, but it also is very clear on kind of what it is that you bring to the conversation, which is ultimately what people will be drawn to enough to stick around for the long haul.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it's a good point about that kind of that range being a strength.
Yeah, it can be tricky because it's like you don't want to be the guy who's like, I think I'm so great, but you also don't want to be the guy who like doesn't necessarily like use their voice and speak up about what they really feel like they're actually good at, because it's just that kind of battle. It's like you got to find that very slim right in the middle to not look like you're cocky and not look like you're underselling yourself.
Yeah, that's it. That's a tough one. I think, for me,
Absolutely.
I'll speak for myself. I've struggled with that particular balance, like in probably every professional area of my life, like forever. And I probably will continue to do so. But, it's a journey.
Yeah. And I mean, it's tricky, especially when you're doing it all yourself and like putting out the music in the way where you're not, you may or may not be getting a lot of retention. It's like you kind of wrestle with the fact of, am I being cocky or am I aware of my own strengths? Um, but yeah, I mean that's my little spiel for now.
Yeah. No, I can definitely, yeah, it's an interesting point. It's something that I will continue to give some thought to. So thanks for the question and thanks for digging into it with me.
No problem. What overall impact do you want to have with your not only just the music, but Ships Have Sailed as a project collectively?
Well, I'd really like to get back, I'd really like to get to a place where we are in a position to like give back a little bit more to the world and to the creative community. It's hard because like time is really finite. Like it is our what I think is like our most precious resource, precious and valuable resource is our time. And I feel like once you get to a certain level, it's you can bring people in to kind of help with the really time consuming, but not necessarily like it's not necessary to have, you know, the one person necessarily doing like all of the minutia behind the scenes. And that could free like Art and I up for like any number of things. Like I would love to get into philanthropy and kind of give back to like younger and emerging musicians and songwriters and kind of help in a more mentorship type of role. To an extent, I am starting to realize that vision. Over the past couple of years, I've been working with several independent artists just kind of like as a co-writer and often as a producer, um, and kind of helping them to find their sound. But again, you kind of have to prioritize the projects that you take on externally when you're the only one like doing the production and the mixing and like the songwriting and also performing most instruments for your own project, right? So it's all a balancing act, but I would love to get to a place where we're able to devote a little bit more time to giving back to our community and possibly, certain causes around the world at large.
No, absolutely. I think that's a kind of great big picture to have because I think giving back just in general is never a bad thing to do, but especially to kind
100%.
of do it within the space that you've been so passionate about and continue to be so passionate about and so active in makes it all the better because it's just going to further the future of that said community.
Yep. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So here's to getting a little bit closer to that this year.
Yeah. Um, I guess that brings us to the final question that I have, which is also just kind of the whole concept behind the podcast. Why music?
I mean, that's an easy one for me. Like, literally, songs just materialize out of thin air. And, like, some of them like some materialize years ago and they still haven't even been created yet, right? Like they're these interesting little kind of like floaty things that just happen and I can't ignore them. Like I literally can't ignore them. I've tried and when a song like wants to be created, it literally will not leave me alone until I create it. And so yeah, unless I want to slowly go insane, um, that's why music.
I mean, I'm sure having the song just kind of be there to bug you until it's done can be a blessing and a curse. It's like a blessing in the way that it's pushing you to finish it, but it's a curse in the way that it's like, if I don't have the time, we're in trouble.
Yep. Yep,
But
100%. And they are very persistent. And also like, I approach music kind of in the same way as like a method actor would approach a role. So depending on like the song itself, like if it's a really, really sad song, I'll wind up feeling really freaking sad for like, weeks on end while I'm creating it. And I've found myself like you know, not like ugly crying, but like definitely like in tears when delivering like certain vocals. And it's all part of the journey, but it's not always comfortable, you know? But I do think that the music, like when you give that much of yourself to the creative process, it really does shine through when people are listening. So, definitely worth it. And all of the struggles of this business, which I'm sure you have experienced quite significantly yourself. I just whenever I'm getting down about something or like hitting a roadblock or a speed bump, as it were, I'm just like I try to remind myself that as difficult as it can be, like the idea that we can create something out of thin air and it can, you know, stop somebody from doing something really, really bad to themselves in a moment of weakness, like thousands of miles away, potentially in a different country. Um, or, I mean, that's just one scenario. There's like any number of things that could help people to fall in love. It could like help people to celebrate bringing a new family member into the world or like whatever have you. Like the idea that we can impact people's lives just by like putting ourselves out there is just so profound that like it makes all the bad stuff kind of like drift into kind of like the irrelevant perspective, you know?
Absolutely. I mean, the impact that music can have just in itself is crazy. And it, like, yeah, like it definitely comes with its roadblocks and whatnot in creating. But I think at the end of the day, that is kind of what wraps it up and makes it all kind of worthwhile. It's like, yeah, it might suck to experience this because, like, I'm writing a sad song, so I'm feeling that way, but it's going to reach somebody in the right way later on that'll just kind of make that part worth it.
100%.
Well, I think that brings us to the end of this episode of the Why Music podcast. Thanks for listening, and check back in next week for another interview with another independent artist.